Hello everyone, this is Naha and I want to talk to you about flying a drone in Canada. So this is for US citizens and Canadians because a lot of the processes are similar, but they do have their nuances. So my father and I took a great trip to Canada and thought, why don't we fly our drone? So this video is all about how do you fly your drone and what it takes to do that in Canada. So there's a lot of information coming up, so I should warn you, but just take some time, pay attention, and feel free to ask us any questions. Also note that there are consequences to not following the rules, so that would be fines and things that are unfortunately even worse. So my dad and I planned a trip to Vancouver and Whistler and thought, hey, why don't we take our drone? It should be beautiful. We can take pictures and do all kinds of really fun stuff. However, it's never that simple. The two of us thought that we could just use the trust license that we completed in the US, and that would transfer to Canada. But that's definitely not the case. So Canadian drone flying and licensing is a little more complicated. So first things first, it's split up into two parts. One, small basic operations, and the second part, small advanced operations. However, just taking a test is not enough in this case. You also have to get special permission that has to be asked for 30 business days in advance. And that's the Special Flight Operations Certificate. So you'll even see the link on the slide right there. And you need to take the test before filling out the form because it'll ask you for your pilot number that you'll only get if you pass the test. Also, another important note is that US citizens, you cannot register your drone in Canada. So the good news is my father and we passed, so we got our special yay moment that you'll see in a lot of the other videos. And we even did a little competition between the two of us, and I really wanted to win, but you can't win if you tie. So we both got the same score, which it's good news, but I wanted to win, so you know how it is. However, passing the test isn't super easy. It can be challenging. So my father and I had also been studying for the US Part 107, so a lot of the information on that test applies to the Canadian one. So if you're not familiar with that, you might struggle a little bit. But an important thing to note, that is, I'm a millennial and I live on Google and I use the internet a lot, so just keep in mind that using Google to muscle your way through the test and find answers is going to be not the best idea because it's quite misleading, and a lot of times you'll find the US rules and not the Canadian rules. So back to the two parts is that as a recreational flyer, the basic operations is enough. However, the small advanced operations is more for commercial flyers, and we're going to discuss a little bit more about the basic operations test with its 8 sections coming soon. But keep in mind that you should look more into the differences between basic and advanced based on what you're trying to do. So these are the 8 sections of the basic operations test. So you'll see subject area and how many questions. So for example, air law, air traffic rules and procedures has 14 questions on the exam. And you can go down that list and see. So this comes from the knowledge requirements for pilots of remotely piloted aircraft systems, 200 grams up to and including 25 kilograms, operating with a visual line of sight. So that's also where you're going to go to find all of this information, and you can see the link on the bottom left of this slide. And please take a note here. So you'll see the subject area number 3, human factors, and number 4, meteorology, is something that my father and I found to be especially difficult and tricky. So in studying, you might want to pay some extra attention to that. So right here is our time limits and passing scores. So you'll notice the first one, the remotely piloted aircraft systems basic operations, that you'll have 35 questions in an hour and a half, which we found to be a lot of time to go through our sources and think about the answer to the question, so don't feel as though you have to rush. take your time, be patient, really consider the answers and the questions, because the test can be kind of challenging. So you can't just memorize it and get right through it. And this is also from that source that we mentioned earlier. So the fun stuff. How did we prepare for our basic exam? Well, as I mentioned, we had some familiarity with the Part 107, and we used the Pilot Institute course, which the link is right there, and we found that to be very helpful. I can even show you right here. So you see Pilot Institute, pass the test, take to the skies. This is what we were using to study for the US test. And a lot of the concepts are transferable. We also used YouTube videos from other people talking about some of the information that would be on the Canadian test. And lastly, we found websites that were very helpful. However, please note that in some of those YouTube videos had bad information, which can result in test errors and make the test more challenging. So the links below will help you find the knowledge you need to tackle the exam. So here I'll show you. The first one is the knowledge requirements for pilots of remotely piloted aircraft systems, 250 grams up to and including 25 kilograms, operating within vessel line of sight. So I'll scroll down so you can see what it looks like. And here you'll see the 8 sections that I mentioned earlier. And you can also go through it. It'll give you a lot more information, such as time limits that I showed you. It'll also break up the knowledge areas into more information so that you'll better have an understanding of what you need to know. The next thing I'll show you is the Aeronautical Information Manual, which is abbreviated as the AIM, which this is definitely something you should be familiar with because it'll be very helpful. And you'll also want to note that during this test, it's open book, so you should make good use of the control find functionality. So that's why we have it open in a PDF here, because it'll be very easy to just do control find and look for something. So type it in and hit enter. Is a good way to tackle this. So I'll have all kinds of things like aerodromes and Canadian runway indexes. You can go through it and that'll be pretty helpful. And it has a table of contents as well. The next thing you can look at is this is what's known as the Canadian Aviation Regulation. So what you'll want to see here that's really important is Part 9, remotely piloted aircraft systems. So you'll see that right here you have a list of definitions, and although it's not all the definitions you need, these are certainly important ones that are highly likely to appear on the exam. The next thing you'll see is this, Drone Laws in Canada, made by UAB Coach, which they did a very good job of putting this all together. And they also list a lot of the key regulations right here that you'll encounter multiple questions on. And right here is the website that you can go to get permission for special drone operations that we mentioned earlier about submitting them 30 days in advance. So you'll see right here in big black letters on this page, and it says who needs to apply. So if you look here, this is especially important that you need to apply as a foreign operator. So this applies to people who are not Canadian citizens, so are US citizens. There's also a couple other key rules that you should be aware of. And you'll keep wanting to keep scrolling down to this how to apply section. So you'll notice first you'll have the drone management portal. So this is where you're going to go to actually take your exam. And then right here, this link is going to take you to the applications for special flight operations certificate. So this is an example of what that form looks like. So you'll fill out your name and other information, and also notice, as I'm scrolling down, that you'll want to click this, foreign operator or pilot, and any of these other statements that apply to what you're doing. And we also thought it was kind of funny that you could apply to operate more than 5 RPAs. Not quite sure how that works, but maybe it's not all at the same time. So also notice you should put your purpose and your location and this pilot certificate number. You're going to get this once you pass your exam. So take the exam, then fill out the form. And then they also want your RPA type, pilot names, visual observers. But note when you go below, this is important because we missed it. So you'll see right here the 30 working days before date of operation. So the next thing, of course, is you have to turn in the form. So you send it to this email address right over here, or you can fax it or send it by mail. And here are the links that you can use to access the documents we just showed you. So right here are the key items that you need to know. So they're not all of them, but they're very helpful for your basic operations test. So it says 5.6 kilometers away from airports, 1.9 away from heliports, not flying in controlled airspaces, and a couple other really important ones, like take close attention to this ability to read a NOTAM, because you probably should take some practice, because those can be kind of challenging. Also note you can't fly over people. And so these are basic information, but it's not going to be enough to just know these. So you're also going to have to apply them to the questions they ask you. Sometimes they might ask you what went wrong. So it might be one of these things. Something to think about. So, what did my dad and I learn when we were taking these tests and going through everything? The good news is the test is passable, so you can do it too. Both of us scored around 90% on our first attempt, so part of the yay moment. And we're probably going to go back and take the advanced one, for fun and because we can do it. Also, the process to get your approval is procedural. So you fill out the form, you send it, wait for approval. Like I said, memorization is not enough. Some thinking involved. And another important thing to know, something kind of tricky they put in the exam, never fly near a manned aircraft. So if you see that in the question, you know something's wrong. And you don't have to buy expensive test prep materials. Just study the things we showed you and read them. And the other good thing is you can fail the test fast and then pass it quickly. You can retake it, so there's no need to stress about that part. So fail fast and pass quicker. Google is not always super helpful. It can be misleading, so keep that in mind too. And like we said, we use the Part 107, but there's key differences. So Part 107 focuses a lot more on airport operations. And another thing is there's different rules for the Canadians about flying around people and advertised events. And there's also key differences regarding aerodromes, airports, and heliports. So Google probably won't help you there since that's not really that common in the US test. So keep that in mind. Also, the Canadian test was using meters instead of feet, and they were using kilometers. It was kind of weird, not the US standard feet system. So also be aware of that. So a lot of things you'll notice is the US has a rule about 400 feet above ground level. So don't keep that. Don't use the 400 number because it's going to be different in meters. Also, the Canadian test was using the term write a lot, so don't be nervous. The Canadian test is multiple choice. You're not writing essays or filling in answers. And the passing scores are different. And the human factors are different as well. So, for example, the drinking rule is different than the US test. So the Canadians have a 12-hour rule versus the US test says the 8 hours rule. And like I said, you can retake it every 24 hours and it's open book. So keep your resources open, use the control find, and just do your best. Another helpful thing that we found was get the Nav Canada app. So that's like the sort of like the Before You Fly app, except it gives you the controlled versus uncontrolled airspace in Canada. That's very helpful for checking if you can fly there before you actually fly. So, some of the things that we liked about the test is it's remote. You can take it online, and that'd be nice for the Part 107, so you don't have to go to the testing center. The open book was definitely a plus, so a lot less stress. And it'd be nice if the US and Canadian testing had some sort of reciprocity like you do with driver's licenses. So US licensed drivers can drive in Canada. So something similar would be helpful. And of course, we wish you the best. So good luck and happy flying.